breaking free, understanding and overcoming social anxiety. So I'll just start with introducing myself. So as Patrick mentioned, my name is Dr. Valerie Caldeira. I go by Val or Valerie. I'm really informal that way, so feel free to call me that. I'm a registered psychologist within BC. Just give you a little bit of background about myself. I was born and raised here in Vancouver. I did my bachelor's at UBC, and then I went over to UVic to do my master's and PhD in clinical psychology. During my training, I had a ton of experience working in different mental health settings. So I worked in community mental health, university clinics, as well as inpatient and outpatient mental health clinics. And I currently work in private practice. So I run a clinic, Dr. Valerie Caldeira, Registered Psychologist and Associates, where myself and a few associates provide assessment and treatment to clients. I personally work with kids, teens, and adults. And I treat a wide range of conditions. So what are we going to talk about today? So as you know, this talk is about social anxiety. And we'll start by talking about what exactly is social anxiety. What does that look like? And then we'll go into why is social anxiety problematic? What does it look like, or how can it interfere with our functioning? We'll talk about thoughts and behaviors that perpetuate or worsen social anxiety, as well as strategies to overcome social anxiety. So this is really the meat of the presentation. I'm going to give you some cognitive behavioral strategies. Some of you might have heard of cognitive behavioral therapy before. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is an evidence-based approach to treating social anxiety. So we have lots of research to show its effectiveness for treating social anxiety. And then finally, I'll give you some resources, some self-help resources. I imagine many of you are here today either because possibly you yourself suffer from social anxiety, or you might have a loved one that does, or maybe you're just curious about social anxiety. But yeah, I'll give you some resources that you can look at on your own as well. So what is social anxiety? So social anxiety is an intense fear in social situations. So this could be performance situations. So for example, it could be giving a presentation. So a presentation at work or in school if you're a student. It could be raising your hand in class or talking in a meeting at work. It could also be let's say a dance recital or piano recital or acting performance. Having social anxiety or anxiety in those situations. It could also be interpersonal interaction. So this could be meeting a new person. It could be going out with friends. It could be dating, whether that be online dating or dating in person. It could be going to parties, for example. So different situations where you're interacting with others. And the thing about social anxiety, it can be very general. So those different types of social anxiety that I mentioned, or different situations that people might experience social anxiety in, you could experience anxiety in all of them, or it could be very specific, and you could have anxiety in just one or two of them. So for example, public speaking, it's a common one for social anxiety, worrying about speaking in front of others, even a small group or a larger group. And that could still be classified as social anxiety if it is interfering with that person's functioning. And the fears that underlie social anxiety often have to do with embarrassing themselves or others judging them. It could be worrying about others viewing them in different ways. So others viewing them as anxious tends to be a big one. So individuals with social anxiety sometimes worry about showing signs that they're anxious. So they worry about blushing, for example, face going red. And then when if they are blushing, then they worry more in that situation, which often leads to more blushing. Other things like if they're sweating, they worry about people noticing that they're sweating, or if they're trembling. So yeah, worrying about others noticing those symptoms of anxiety. Also, others viewing them as weak or like crazy or stupid or yeah, dumb, like those types of judgments. Okay. I really love this image because I think it really kind of illustrates social anxiety really well. Um, so just kind of all eyes on the person. So someone with social anxiety worrying about everyone, noticing their every move. So judging them for what they're wearing or what they're saying or how they're eating their food or where their hands are when they're talking. So kind of just, yeah, all eyes on them in a social situation. I'll just go through some examples of social anxiety. So one I already mentioned is presentations. That's a big one. So that could be presentations at work or at school. It can be in front of a few people or larger number of people. Performances, so dance performances or a music performance or a drama presentation. Talking in front of people. So that could be people that you know somewhat well, like coworkers or possibly new people that you haven't met before. Meeting new people, dating, I spoke about previously as well. So that could be dating, meeting people in person and dating, or it could also be online dating, which of course, kind of new age way of dating where people are sending messages or photos and people with social anxiety sometimes worrying about, is that, am I writing enough or am I writing too little or am I saying the right thing and kind of sort of going over what they're typing and rereading it and rereading it and rereading it and really struggling to send a message or send a photo. Parties and or social gatherings being another example of social anxiety. Standing out in front of others. So anything that draws attention to an individual can be hard for someone with social anxiety. So wearing bright clothing, for example, so like bright yellow shirt or like pink, anything that kind of stands out, or bulky jewelry, that could be hard for someone with social anxiety. So quite often people will try to avoid having attention drawn towards them with those types of things, bright clothing, jewelry. Being watched while performing an activity is sometimes also hard for someone with social anxiety. So that could be playing a sport. Let's say if you're in a sports competition, it could be eating. So sometimes someone with social anxiety might not want to eat at a restaurant because others might see them eat, or they might judge them how they're eating, if they have food on their face or if they're slurping while eating. Or going to a dinner party might be really tough because they sort of feel that people are watching them eat. Also doing homework. So doing homework in public, like at a coffee shop or at a library where, again, other people might be viewing them, might be hard for someone with social anxiety. So I often get this question, why is social anxiety problematic? And it can be problematic for a number of reasons. I've highlighted 3 here, but these are just some reasons. So one area is it can really limit our academic opportunities. So sometimes someone with social anxiety might not pursue a certain field of education because they worry about taking classes that have presentations or group work, and they really want to avoid doing those types of things that elicit social anxiety. So they might, for example, avoid business programs tend to have a lot of group work or presentations. So they're like, I'm not going to take those courses, or I'm not going to study that program. Or they might avoid taking classes with certain teachers, even though they really like that, they really are interested in that class. Maybe a teacher they've read online that teacher makes you do a group project or makes you do a presentation, and they're like, I'm not going to take that. As well as career opportunities. So interviews tend to be a big part of getting a new job or getting promotions, and that can be really scary for people. So they might avoid possibly applying for a job that they would be eligible for because they worry about going through the interview process. There's a lot of networking that also comes with promotion. So let's just say if you're working in a job where people eat lunch together in a lunchroom and they talk during that and they're networking during the lunch hour, you might be missing out on some of that if you're wanting to eat lunch on your own because of social anxiety. So that's another way that it can get in the way. It also can restrict social activities. So going out with friends can be hard sometimes, even friends that you know well. Perhaps you have three good friends and you're supposed to go to a movie together, and one of your friends sends you a message saying, "Oh, I'm going to bring a coworker that's really nice, and I asked her if she can join us." And the person with social anxiety might be like, "Oh my gosh, I can't go now. I'm going to tell her I'm sick, or there's no way that I can attend because I don't want to meet this new person. It's giving me too much anxiety." Relationship is another area. So that again can be friendships, but it can be romantic relationships. So often people with social anxiety will stick to friendships that they've had for a long time. Maybe they're childhood friends, or maybe people that they grew up with, cousins, things like that, so that they don't have to develop new friendships or relationships in general. Can also interfere with our daily routines. So this might be things like going to the grocery store. So sometimes people might avoid going to a busy grocery store. They might avoid going to the grocery store at certain times of the day because it's too busy, and they might worry about people noticing them and judging them. They might struggle with making appointments. So let's say making a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, and they might either get someone in their life to do that for them, like a parent or a partner or a friend, or they might just not make that appointment because social anxiety gets in the way. Could be other things too, like going into elevators or waiting rooms. Those types of interactions tend to sometimes involve small talk or eye contact with people, and that can be hard for individuals with social anxiety. Okay, so yeah, those are just some examples of how it can be problematic, but of course there's many other ways that that it can interfere with an individual's functioning. So there's three components in social anxiety or anxiety in general. There's a thought piece, there's a feelings, emotion piece, which also includes a physiological response, and then an action or behavior piece. And you can see from these arrows that these three components interact in a bidirectional way. So our thoughts influence our feelings, and our feelings influence our thoughts, and our thoughts influence our actions, and our actions influence our feelings, and our feelings influence our actions. So they're all related, and they all fuel one another. And I'll go through this in more detail with each component. Okay. So I'll start with the feelings or the physical reactions. So underlying anxiety, these are common physiological responses that people experience. So heart racing or heart palpitations, blushing, headaches, stomach aches, nausea, vomiting possibly, sweating, experiencing hot flashes, shaking, some shortness of breath or trouble breathing, tightness in your chest, dizziness, sometimes even fainting. Other things that I've heard clients say to me, sometimes people get acne or they get rashes, skin rashes when they're really anxious. Other times people have said to me like they tend to lose more hair, or they shed more hair when they're really anxious. So those could be other things. So it really is sort of client specific or person specific, what types of physiological reactions you might get when you're anxious, but these tend to be common ones. There's also the thought piece. So I mentioned some common thoughts underlying social anxiety, but these tend to be catastrophic or negative thinking. So again, fear of judgment, others judging them, being embarrassed, making mistakes. Again, people viewing them as like anxious or weak, and noticing that they're anxious, or noticing that they're weak, or as I mentioned, sort of crazy or stupid. These types of anxious thoughts that come up in social situations, or when you're worried about an upcoming social situation. And then there's the behavior piece. So we can experience the behaviors in that feared event, or we can also experience them in anticipation to that feared event. So sometimes poor sleep, for example, the days leading up to that social interaction, you might be experiencing poor sleep. So that might be trouble getting to sleep. It could be waking up really early in the morning and being unable to get back to sleep. Let's say waking up at 5 in the morning and being unable to get back to sleep. Could be waking up in the middle of the night and sort of having disturbed sleep. Could be having nightmares, either about the feared situation or just something completely random, but just experiencing nightmares leading up to that event. Reassurance seeking is another one. So this is when we're asking people in our lives, let's say a parent or a friend or a partner, things like, am I going to be okay? Am I going to be okay? Like, I have a presentation in 2 days. Are you sure it's going to go okay? Are you sure I'm not going to make too many mistakes? So really kind of getting that reassurance and having that parent or the partner or friend or whomever that person is say to you, like, yeah, it's going to be okay. You can do it. It's going to be okay. But really kind of seeking out that reassurance. Crying would be another one. Also irritability or outbursts. That often is a way that anxiety can be presented. So underlying the anxiety, having it come out as irritability or outbursts, often taken out on loved ones, people that we have in our lives and we know that they're not going anywhere. And sometimes our anxiety can come out as irritability towards those loved ones. They get the best of us and also the worst of us. And then also behavioral avoidance. This is a really, really important one. So a very, very common behavior when it comes to social anxiety. So we tend to avoid the thing that makes us anxious. So if we have a presentation at school or at work, maybe calling in sick for that presentation, being like, I can't do it. I just can't do it, and avoiding doing it. But then there's also the possibility of doing the feared event or the feared behavior, but doing it with what we call safety behaviors. So safety behaviors are things that that make us feel safe in that moment or reduce anxiety in the short term, but they actually increase anxiety in the long term. And I'll explain that a little bit more. But in short, they're things that make us feel safe and reduce anxiety, but they actually increase anxiety in the long term, which is a really, really important piece. The reason for that is we never get to see that we can do it without the safety behavior. I'll give you some examples of safety behaviors. So avoiding eye contact is one type of safety behavior. Talking in a soft voice or muttering your words, sort of kind of trying to fade into the backgrounds or really trying to just not be noticed. So as I mentioned about kind of avoiding bright clothing, that would be kind of another example of trying to fade into the background. Avoiding social interactions at parties. So that might be at the party, maybe going to the bathroom often so that you're avoiding talking to people. You're just kind of like going in and out of the bathroom so you can avoid social contact. Or maybe, going to the snack table often and refilling your plate so that you can kind of get out of conversations and then try to come back in, but again, trying to avoid talking to people while you're at that party. Neutral clothing, as I mentioned again. So again, trying to just just fade out or just kind of be in the background. Scrolling on your phone in waiting rooms or in elevators. And then, of course, alcohol and drug use being another type of safety behavior. It's really important that these are only safety behaviors if the purpose of doing them is to avoid feeling anxious or to reduce anxiety. So lots of people scroll on their phones in waiting rooms. That's a very common thing. We do it to pass time, and there's, sometimes interesting things on our phone that we want to look at while we're waiting for, let's say, a doctor to see us. That's not necessarily a safety behavior. It becomes a safety behavior if the purpose of doing it is you're trying to avoid social anxiety, social interaction. So I'm just going to sit here and scroll on my phone so that way no one will make eye contact with me, and then I won't have to talk to anyone because you look busy when you're on your phone, and people are less likely to interrupt you or talk to you and make small chat with you if you're on your phone. As you can see, I went over kind of thoughts and feelings and actions, and you can see how they all relate to one another in this bidirectional way. So really, this is kind of the meat of the presentation. The cognitive behavioral strategies is as I mentioned, CBT, an evidence-based approach to treating social anxiety. So and it's what I do with many clients. So I really love teaching people cognitive behavioral strategies, and I've seen it work and help people overcome social anxiety. So I'm really happy to share them with you today. Often when I see people with social anxiety, they say, I just want to be less anxious. I just want to kind of turn off that anxiety. And of course, if it were that easy, if you could just kind of turn a light switch on and off, you would do that. Of course, no one wants to feel that social anxiety. So, but it's not that easy, as you know. So instead of actually trying to just stop feeling anxious, what we know from a lot of research is that we can actually challenge our thoughts with more helpful thoughts, and we can change our behaviors. And this in turn changes our anxiety. So it reduces our anxiety. So lots of research to show that cognitive strategies to change our ways of thinking and behavioral strategies to change our behaviors can actually reduce our anxiety. So I'll start with the cognitive strategies, and then we'll go into the behavioral strategies. Okay, so this is an example of an unhelpful thought in a social situation. So for example, I'm going to make a mistake during the presentation and everyone will laugh. So of course, with a thought like that, you might have your heart race, you might have some trouble breathing, you might have some dizziness, a headache. So lots of physiological symptoms of anxiety. And then, of course, if you're feeling that way, so if you're feeling those physical symptoms and trouble or racing heart, trouble breathing, dizziness, headache, of course, you're going to be like, I'm not going to go do that presentation. I'm just going to call in sick tomorrow, so I don't need to do that presentation. So, of course, you call in sick, you avoid that feared situation, and then you're like, phew, okay, well, I didn't have to do it, so now I feel better, right? So, but the problem with that, then the next time around, we have those same thoughts. We have, I can't do it. Last time I wasn't able to do it, so I definitely can't do it this time. And it fuels that cycle, that triangle. We call this the CBT triangle of anxiety. So it fuels that anxiety, fuels those physical symptoms, and on we go. We never have the opportunity to get that corrective feedback. So as an example, we can change that unhelpful thought to a more realistic thought. So in this example, I usually do okay on presentation, so I'll probably do okay tomorrow. So a more realistic, it's not a positive thought. So we're not saying, I'm going to kill it and I'm going to do the best and I'm going to be giving the best presentation that anyone has ever given, because that might be unrealistic for someone that isn't, if let's just say presentations isn't their strong suit, they're probably not going to give the best presentation ever in comparison to everyone that has ever given a presentation. But they'll probably do okay. So then with that, we see less of those physical symptoms. So less heart racing, less trouble breathing, less dizziness. And then because of that, maybe you prepare the presentation, practice the presentation, get a good night's sleep, and then of course go the next day and do the presentation. And then by doing it, you might have some more helpful thoughts come about. Hey, I actually did okay. It wasn't that bad. Yeah, it wasn't my favorite thing to do, but I still did okay. And then, of course, the next time around, we can use that as evidence of, yeah, okay, I can do this. Again, it's not my favorite thing to do. Let's say for a student, I prefer doing tests over presentations, but I can still do it and I can still manage through it. I may not get the best mark on them, but I still do okay. So actually, I'll just go back here. So we can see kind of by changing that thought to a more realistic thought, we can change our emotion, but we can also change that behavior. Just give you some examples of thinking traps. So people that struggle with anxiety, they often have these automatic thoughts, and they're often classified into different thinking traps. So I've highlighted a few here. One is called fortune telling. So fortune telling is predicting the future and thinking it's going to turn out badly. So I won't make any friends. I'm going to make a mistake and everyone will laugh at me. So again, kind of predicting the future and thinking it's going to turn out badly. Another one is mind reading. This is when we think we know what other people are thinking about us and we think they're thinking negative things about us. So she thinks I'm stupid. They think I'm annoying. Labeling is another one. This is where we give ourselves one word to describe ourselves. So I'm a failure, I'm a loser, I'm a loner, things like that. So a really negative label to describe ourselves. And then catastrophizing. I won't do well on, this is an example, I won't do well on the presentation and I'll get kicked out of university and then I won't get a job in the future. And then, I don't know, my parents will disown me and then I'll be homeless. Like you can see how it goes very far, very quickly. So catastrophizing is thinking the worst possible thing is going to happen and thinking you'll be unable to cope with it. So those are just some thinking traps. Often when I'm teaching thinking traps to people, they're like, oh yeah, I definitely engage in fortune telling, for example, or I definitely do a lot of mind reading. So you might be able to pick out ones that you do often. Perfect. So when we're challenging helpful thought or unhelpful thoughts with more helpful thoughts, what we're really trying to do is what we call detective thinking. We're trying to think like a detective. What would a detective find if they were evaluating the situation? So we're replacing these anxious, unhelpful, negative thoughts with more realistic thoughts as a detective would. And sometimes it's helpful for people to use certain questions, prompting questions to get at the evidence. So for example, what's the evidence that this thought is true? What's the evidence that this thought is not true? I'm 100% sure that blank will happen. So I'm 100% sure that I'm going to make a mistake on the presentation and everyone will laugh at me and put it on the internet so everyone else laughs at it. So I'm 100% sure that's going to happen. What will probably happen? What is the best that could happen? What is the worst that could happen and how could I cope with it if that happens? I love that question, and clients often love that one too, because if we can cope with the worst case scenario, we know we can deal with anything. So let's say if it's a presentation and they're worried about stumbling on their words, well, worst case scenario is they do stumble on their words, and how do you cope with it? Well, maybe I take a moment, maybe I review my notes for just a minute, and then I continue on with the presentation. And quite likely they're able to cope with that. What has happened in the past in this particular situation? So that kind of speaks to what's likely to happen. Given the evidence of what has happened in the past, what's likely to happen this time around? Okay. I'll just do an example here of detective thinking. So I've taken a situation. So talking to someone at a party who is looking around the room rather than looking at you. So the person is appearing to be uninterested in what you're talking about. But yeah, as you're talking to them, they're looking at other areas of the room. So the anxious thought here is, I'm such a loser. No one wants to talk to me. He thinks I'm really boring. I should just leave this party and go home. And of course, with a thought like that, you might be having high levels of anxiety, so maybe 9 out of 10, for example, maybe also some sad feelings and yeah, feeling maybe hopeless or sad in that situation, possibly 8 out of 10 is an example. So what we want to do is we want to challenge these thoughts with more realistic thoughts. So here would be an example of a more realistic thought. It is possible that he's looking around the room because he's supposed to meet someone at the party. Maybe he's looking for that person. Maybe he himself is anxious about being at the party. So maybe he's suffering from social anxiety and he's struggling to make eye contact with you. Maybe he needs to get home and is looking for his ride. So maybe he's like past his curfew, or maybe he has a really important meeting or soccer game or very early in the morning and he has to wake up early and he's sort of scanning to find his ride so he can let them know that, hey, can we get going? I need to be up super early tomorrow. And with those realistic thoughts, you can see that anxiety comes down, and sadness also comes down in this particular example. So, and in that particular example, so if we challenge those thoughts with more helpful thoughts, so yeah, maybe he's anxious, or maybe he's looking for his ride, or maybe he needs to get home. You can see that that's going to not only bring down that feeling of anxiety, and possibly those physical symptoms, but it's also going to influence our actions or our behaviors. So, so maybe compared to that anxious thought, initially in this example, maybe you might actually leave that party. Maybe you might be like, I can't be here anymore. I'm going home. But with the more realistic thought, You might actually stay at the party. You might actually be able to talk to someone at the party. You might actually meet someone new. So it actually changes that behavior. And then with that behavior, possibly meeting someone new, possibly having a good conversation with someone, that contributes to other thoughts. So maybe the next time you go to a party thinking, oh, you know what, I actually did talk to someone at that party and it actually went okay. So maybe at this party or maybe at this social gathering, I'll also be able to do it. So you can see how those components influence one another in that bidirectional way. And by targeting that thought piece, it can influence our actions and our feelings. I'll actually just show you one other way of doing this, of challenging our anxious thoughts with more helpful thoughts. Bear with me. My next slide, it has really small print. I wanted to get this this example all in one page. I will read it out to you if you can't see it, but yeah, please bear with me here. So here's the slide of yeah, another way of testing thoughts or challenging anxious thoughts. So this example is a presentation at work. And the anxious thought here that the person is thinking is, I'm going to stumble over my words. Everyone will laugh at me. And the next question is, how much do I believe this thought? So this is a pretend example that I just made up. But in this example, this person believed it a lot. So let's say 90%. How does this thought make me feel? So anxious and a really high level of anxiety, 95. So here are some prompting questions to kind of get at more realistic thoughts. So what makes me think the thought is true? So realistically, I'm not the best public speaker. What's the evidence that this thought is not true? I've done presentations at work in the past and they've gone okay. What's another way to look at the situation? If I prepare and practice my presentation, I should do okay. Even if I make a mistake or stumble on my words, it can still be a good presentation. What is the worst that can happen and how would I cope with this? If I make a mistake, I can correct myself. What is the best that could happen? The presentation goes smoothly. What will probably happen? I will probably stumble on my words at least once because that might happen in presentations. In fact, actually, it commonly does. I probably have stumbled over my words many times so far in this presentation. So yeah, I will probably stumble over my words at least once, but the audience may not even notice or even care. And I can still get my point across. So even if we stumble over our words, it can still go okay. What will happen if I keep telling myself that unhelpful thought? So that thought about, I'm going to stumble over my words and everyone will laugh at me. Then I will feel anxious and I will call in sick the day of the presentation. What could happen if I changed my thinking? I would feel more confident about the presentation. And then finally, what should I do now? Well, prepare the presentation, practice it, and then finally do the presentation. And with those helpful thoughts or more realistic thoughts, the belief in that negative thought of stumbling over your words and everyone laughing at you might be reduced to, let's say, a 50, and that feeling of anxiety also possibly being reduced down to a 50. So you can see if we challenge those thoughts with more realistic thoughts, thinking about what's the worst that could happen? How could I cope with it? What's more likely to happen? We can see that anxiety come down. Okay, behavioral strategies. Behavioral strategies are very important with social anxiety. So, I mean, cognitive strategies are as well, but I think like really, yeah, challenging our fears or really kind of working at doing some of the behaviors that we avoid really help reduce social anxiety. So, so again, if we really kind of target those actions, as you know, it can influence our thoughts and it can also influence our emotions. And that, again, in turn influences our thoughts and our actions. And around and round we go in that CBT triangle. Okay, here we go. So behavioral exposures are purposely facing our fears. So what we want to do is we want to expose ourselves to the things that we avoid doing, and we want to do this very gradually. So if your biggest fear, let's say if you had a fear of presentations, if like 10 out of 10 is doing or let's say it's going to a party, we don't want to start there. You don't want to kind of just say, tomorrow I'm going to go to a party, I'm going to like hit the club and I'm just going to do it, because that might create too much anxiety and you might just be like, forget it, I'm not going when the day comes. I can't do it. It's too hard. So instead, we want to start out small and we want to work our way up to, let's say, that party. So you can see I have an image of a ladder here. So it's really kind of climbing those rungs of the ladder until starting out small and getting up to the top of that ladder. So again, really kind of gradual way of facing your fears. We want it to be controlled. So meaning we want this to be a choice. What we know about behavioral exposures, if these are sprung on you, or if you're forced into them, let's say by a parent or a partner, sort of like, here's the phone, you call and make your own doctor's appointment, and they just pass you the phone and you're like, I can't do that, right? So that actually increases anxiety. So we don't want that. We really want the person to choose to do them and have a plan to do them. You could start by doing them with assistance with others. I'll get into that a little bit later. So we want them to be controlled. We want them to be repeated. So we know the more we do things, the easier it gets. Sort of similar to driving. Those of you that drive, the first few times you drove, you're probably thinking, okay, 10 and 2, 10 and 2, and move my foot to the gas and back to the brake and lots to think, and check my rear view mirror and all of those things that you're trying to manage and keep tabs on. And then of course, when you're used to driving and have driven very many times, it all becomes automatic and you're sort of on autopilot doing that. And same is true of exposures. The first time we do them can be really tough and elicit a lot of anxiety, but we do it over and over and over again, and they get easier and easier and easier. And we also want them to be sufficient duration so that we can actually see anxiety coming up, but then also anxiety coming down, and seeing ourselves kind of ride the wave of anxiety. We also want, as I mentioned before, kind of avoidance. It reduces anxiety in the short term, but it increases it in the long term. So what we want to do is we want to gradually face our fears. And if we have safety behaviors in any of the things that we're doing, we want to gradually remove them. So as I was saying, you might have a person that you do things with, and that can be considered a safety behavior or a safety person. So initially doing it with them, but then eventually getting to the point where you're able to do them on your own if that's important to you. And the key here is that we want to expect to feel anxious. We are going to feel anxious. We're doing things that are hard. We're facing our fears, but we will experience less anxiety as we do them more and more and more. Okay. So I've just put out an example here. I have a couple examples. This is the first one about a class presentation. So let's just say I just made it a university student, for example, that wants or needs to or wants to give a class presentation, and that would be their 10 out of 10 in this fear ladder. Leading up to that, 1 out of 10 might just be saying hi to the teacher or the professor at the start of the class. So that might elicit some anxiety because they are talking to a person that they may normally not talk to. Then working their way up, maybe saying hi to a peer in class. Then asking a teacher a question after class, like when's the project due, for example. Maybe asking a classmate a question like, how was your reading break, for example, or how was your spring break? Asking a 5 out of 10, asking a question during English class, raising your hand and asking that question. Maybe 6 out of 10 is asking a question during math class. I put those two examples because some classes, for example, can be harder than others. So for some people, math class, asking a question in math class might be harder than asking a question in English class. 7 out of 10, imagine giving a presentation in science class. 8 out of 10, practice the presentation in front of family members. 9 being practicing in front of maybe 2 or 3 friends. And then finally giving that presentation maybe in front of, let's say, 25 people, for example. So again, you want to kind of start on that lower end, do those things over and over again. They get easier and easier, and then you move up to the harder things. And as you master some of those lower steps, those higher steps decrease. So they come down and they feel more manageable. So what was initially a 10 out of 10 giving a class presentation, once you've mastered some of those lower steps, it might actually drop down to possibly an expected, I don't know, 5 out of 10, for example. And then you start to do some of those harder level items. just do another example of grocery shopping. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, sometimes people with social anxiety really worry about grocery shopping. So like going to the store at certain times when it's busy, or having to interact with a cashier, or having to ask someone what aisle something is in if they can't find it. And maybe instead of asking it, a salesperson, they might just kind of, go through all the aisles and try to find it, despite how much time that might take, because, it's just way too hard to ask someone, even though that might make things a lot easier in their life. So here's an example, 10 out of 10 being the aim or the goal to do a full grocery shop on the weekend with the cashier. But starting at maybe sitting in the grocery store parking lot. So maybe just being in that environment of the grocery store can elicit some anxiety. So starting there. Then maybe at home in your own kind of environment, imagining doing a grocery shop. So imagining all the steps and going through the aisles and getting what you need, and then going through the cashier and just kind of imagining all of those steps. 3 out of 10, going to the grocery store on a weekday morning, maybe a Tuesday morning where the store is relatively quiet, with a friend. So that could be kind of a support person, and using the self-checkout. So not having to engage with a cashier. Then maybe going on a weekend where it's a little bit busier, also bringing a friend, and again, using the self-checkout. 5 out of 10, going on a weekday morning with a friend, but maybe buying one item and then using the cashier, or going through the cashier. So having to possibly interact with that cashier. The cashier might ask how your day is going, something like that, or either way, he or she's gonna, or they are gonna share with you how much you need to pay, and you're gonna have to either tap your card or pay cash, or yeah, having that interaction. 6 out of 10, go to the grocery store on a weekday morning by myself and buy one item with the cashier. 7 out of 10, go to the grocery store on a weekday morning, again, a quiet time, but by myself. So dropping that safety person, and buy 3 items with the cashier. Then eventually going to the grocery store on a weekend and buying one item with the cashier. So weekend when maybe it's busier. And then 3 items with the cashier, and then eventually doing a whole grocery shop with the cashier. So what we can see in this example is we're gradually dropping those safety behaviors. We had lots of safety behaviors here with like a friend and using the self-checkout and going during a quiet time. And we're gradually getting rid of those safety behaviors and building up confidence to do it on your own, without having those safety behaviors. And I should actually mention, these fear ladders are really specific to the person. So one person's fear ladder might look very different than another. So I mentioned going at a quiet time to the grocery store. That actually might be harder for some people compared to going during a busy time. So maybe at a busy time, some people might think, okay, well, no one's going to talk to me because the cashier is going to be busy. So I'm going to have to just kind of, speed through because they want to help the next person. So that might actually be easier than it being slower. And maybe the cashier has more time to small talk, chit chat, with the person. So just keeping in mind that it really is an individual fear ladder. Just like in my previous example, I think I put, what did I put? Math as being harder than asking a question in English class. It might be the reverse for some people. Asking a question in English class might be much harder than asking in a math class. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, we just want to gradually drop these safety behaviors when you're ready to do so. Another behavioral strategy is relaxation strategies. So relaxation strategies are things like calm breathing. So this could be done as taking a big breath from the bottom of your stomach, and big breath in and then blowing it out. What I like to teach kids, which sometimes is really helpful for adults, is blowing in as if you're smelling flowers and blowing out as if you're blowing up birthday candles. Could be square breathing that you might have heard before. So breath in 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, breath out for 4 seconds, and then repeat. Progressive muscle relaxation, which I love. Progressive muscle relaxation is tensing different muscle groups. So tensing, let's say your toes to start and like tensing them and then releasing them, and then your legs, tense, 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 and then let it go. Stomach, arms, and then all the way to your face where even you're like scrunching up your nose and tensing your face and then letting go. And the key to that is really recognizing when your body is tense and when it's relaxed, so that when you are tense, just throughout the day, you can notice it better and allow your body to relax. And then there's also visualization, which is imagining a calming scene. So that could be for some people a beach scene. It could be skiing in the mountains. It could be hiking in the mountains. It could be curling up on your couch with a blanket and a good book and a cup of hot chocolate. Whatever is calming for you is important. And the trick with relaxation strategies, we want to do them regularly. So it's just like exercise. We want to kind of implement them in our day, because the more we do them, our overall levels of anxiety decrease. Self-care, so healthy, regular eating is really important. Exercise, sleeping, regular sleep, hobbies also really important, engaging in things that you like doing. I'll just go over some of those self-help resources that I mentioned. So Anxiety Canada is a great resource. They've got lots of really great stuff on their website. So they have a section for kids, a section for teens, and a section for adults, and categorized in different types of anxiety. So social anxiety being one, but also have sections on panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, lots of really great resources. And then they've also created an app called the Mindshift app, which is free, and it has lots of good information. So it also has relaxation strategies like the ones that I've talked about, progressive muscle relaxation. I think it's called tense and release on there, on that app, but also a visualization exercise, a breathing exercise. It also has a section for social anxiety where assertive skills are there, and public speaking and creating healthy relationships. So lots of good information about social anxiety on that app. Great. So here's my contact information. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you have questions about the presentation or just in general, or if you or someone you know is looking for support, wanting to seek out therapy, feel free to contact me. I'd be more than happy to connect you with someone on my team. Yeah, so tell me, questions, any questions? Thank you for bearing with me as I got through all those slides.
We have some wonderful questions for you so far. So
Okay.
let's get into this. I think to some degree you've answered this first question through all the behavioral strategies.
Yep.
So the question was, what happens if a person is unaware of their thoughts, but is
Mm.
very aware of their feelings? How do we help those people with social anxiety?
Right. So they're very unaware, like, yeah, not really aware of their thoughts. They might be having some automatic thoughts. Is that correct? But
Yeah.
they experience the physical sensations of anxiety. Yeah, brilliant question. Really, really good question. So I think part of it is recognizing those thoughts. And so some of that worksheet that we went over can help us kind of pull out some of those thoughts. We could, and in therapy or even on your own, you could come up with like thought records where you can write down some of those thoughts if you do notice some of them. And sometimes people, if they really kind of sit down and pay attention to their thoughts, they might notice them a little bit more. Not always. Sometimes they are really in the background and they're automatic. And I think if that's the case, I would say, let's start working on the behavioral piece. Let's start doing some of the things that we avoid doing to help decrease that anxiety. And maybe while doing some of the things that you avoid doing, you might notice some of those anxious thoughts come up, right? Because you're actually putting yourself in those situations. So you might realize, oh, actually, when I do go and text a friend, like let's just say that's their behavioral exposure to like message a friend, they might have an anxious thought pop up of like, what if they don't message back? Or like, what what if like they notice a spelling mistake on in my message? So some of those automatic anxious thoughts might come up. But even if they don't, I think we can still work on the behavior piece. And I think that would be a really great place to start.
I thought I would just relate a story. I saw Dr. David Burns, who writes several books at the evolution of psychotherapy, and he had one interesting story. This person needed to get over their anxiety like today, kind of thing. So David said, "Okay, let's go out for a walk." And he says to this person, he says, "You know, what I'm going to get you to do is I'm going to introduce you and you're going to start talking to a person that I pick of my choosing." And the guy's going like, "No, no, 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 I can't do this." And he says, "Well, you wanted a fast cure. Let's do this." And so he picked this person, and the person started, introducing and said, "Oh, I'm really scared to talk to you. I'm here today because I've got social anxiety." And then the other person chimes in, "You too, huh? Me too." And the two of them struck up this big long conversation. Dave Burns
Yeah.
is sort of sitting there going, like, "Okay, guys, it's time to finish the conversation." So I thought it was kind of cute.
Yeah.
That's a different behavioral strategy. I don't usually recommend that one. That one's called flooding, and most people don't like the flooding. They prefer the what you've described, which is the fear ladder, the gradual approach to.
Absolutely. And I mean, and just to add to that, there is some research suggesting that we could actually just start with our greatest fear, but usually people don't want to do that. But usually, even if we do start with our greatest fear, what ends up happening is we get that corrective feedback of like, you know what, it actually was okay. It didn't go as bad as I expected. So
Yeah.
that could be helpful. But usually, to get the buy-in from someone that's socially anxious to like kind of start with their 10 out of 10 is pretty hard. So and I think the nice thing about starting out kind of on those lower level items and making it harder and harder as you go is that you build your confidence and you sort of see, hey, that went okay, maybe I can do the next thing, which tends to have people continue on rather than just kind of do one thing and being like never doing that again, like that was really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another person asked a question about the idea that anxiety is kind of normal for everyone, and some people will go ahead and do things anyways, and some people, they go like, "Oh, I can't do this," kind of thing. Do you want to comment a little bit on that? The fact that anxiety is normal?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So anxiety is normal. In fact, actually, we want some anxiety in life. If we actually kind of map performance and anxiety kind of on a curve, I'm sorry, I'm using my hands here, but basically it's a bell curve. So a medium level of anxiety is actually where we see the best performance. So, for example, in a presentation, we want some anxiety because it actually activates us to get ready for that presentation and prepare slides and maybe rehearse the presentation. We want some anxiety, and that's for other things in life too, so a job interview, if we didn't have any anxiety about it, we'd be like, just show up, and we get to the interview and we're like, what am I even interviewing for, and what are they asking me, and I don't know the answers, and I don't even know anything about this company, for example, or a test. If we have a test coming up, we want to feel some anxiety because it prepares us for things, right? It gets us to study, and then we tend to do better on a test because we've actually studied. So low level of anxiety, you might actually, or a low level of stress or anxiety, we might kind of be like, I don't need to worry about that. I'm just going to go hang out with my friends all night long. And you get to the test and you're like, I don't even know any of this information. High level of anxiety or stress is also not helpful in that we're overly stressed in that we're not sleeping well, and we're maybe kind of thinking, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail, I'm not going to be able to pass this test, and then we're staying up and pulling all nighters, and we get to the test and we're like, I can't even read, I'm so tired. That's not helpful either. But a medium level of stress is where what's actually healthy. So the question, I don't know if I really answered the question, but yes, well, did I answer the question? It was sort of like some people do it and some people just kind of get on with it and some people don't. Is
Yeah.
that
Yeah, I think they're trying to differentiate and trying to figure out how to differentiate between the people that, they have the anxiety and they just do it anyways, and the people who have
yeah,
the anxiety but just can't seem to push themselves forward, like giving a
yeah.
speech like you're doing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, to be really frank, is like, yeah, getting ready for this speech, yeah, I did experience some anxiety. I was like, I need to go over my slides. I need to make sure I'm prepared for this. But I think it was a healthy level of anxiety, and that it got me ready for it. And I think the people that maybe you're saying, some people maybe don't, would just kind of call in sick or not, maybe not do it. I think what we want to do is want to encourage them to do some of those things, to challenge some of that anxiety, so that they can see that success. So again, starting with those small things and doing some of those behavioral exposures to build up that confidence. Because avoidance is a natural reaction. When we're worried about something, we're like, I'm just not going to do it, right? It's that like flight kind of, yeah, fight, flight, freeze kind of response. And flight being a really common reaction of like, just can't do it. I'm just going to just call in sick, just can't handle that.
Yeah. Have you
Yeah.
got
So
time for one more? I just
yes,
wanted to do
yes,
a
yes,
quick.
yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yes, do one more.
We're
Absolutely.
going a slightly over time, but we're having a lot of fun here. So
Yes,
I'm just going
we
to do a
are.
little
Absolutely. Yeah, and
let
thank you, everyone, for your honest feedback. It's really important to me. It helps me kind of grow and develop. So I really appreciate the feedback. If you could take the time to do that, so thank you so much.
So
Yeah.
the last one is, somebody mentioned the fact that they really like this idea of the fear ladder. But and I couldn't quite understand the question, but I think it basically was saying, how do you go about pushing through a strong stimulus versus avoidance or making excuses? So
Mm.
I guess, how do we go about building this fear ladder, and then how do we go about motivating ourselves to actually try this?
Okay. Very good
Tough
question.
question.
Yeah.
Left the best one for last here.
Yeah, it's a great question. So how do we motivate ourselves to kind of get through that ladder, right? And there was a second part to it, which I'm blanking on. Was there a second part to it?
Well, they just like, the how does one go about constructing that fear ladder,
Ah,
and then how does one stay motivated? How does one push through
totally,
the fear?
totally, totally, totally. So, yeah, a couple things come to mind. So, of course, you can create this fear ladder on your own. Something that I do in therapy often with clients, where we actually construct this ladder and break it down, break your kind of fear into smaller bits. So, often psychologists or counselors are doing this fear ladder, or creating this fear ladder with clients. But that's not to say you can't do it on your own. Of course you can. So kind of I would start with what is the goal? So what is the 10 out of 10? And then really break it down into smaller steps. So you can see in my example, I have some like safety behaviors in there, things that make it a little bit easier. So having a parent or having a friend or join you in it, or doing it at specific times of the day, things like that, that make it a little bit easier. And then you can kind of gradually reduce those things. Because again, it's harder to do it if we just go right to 10 out of 10. So that's sort of how to break it down. Um, in order to motivate you. So I think sometimes when I work with kids, for example, so I see kids, teens, and adults in my practice. I've trained across the lifespan. When in particular when I work with kids and parents are like, how do I motivate my kid? I actually say we do things in life for reward. This is hard work. Like we are working hard, and it's okay to give your child a reward for doing something that's hard. So if that's messaging a friend, asking them to hang out, yeah, maybe they get a little treat for that, or maybe they get extra screen time, or maybe they get to I don't know, have a later curfew, whatever it is, whatever the parents feel comfortable as a reward. And I think we can do that as adults for ourselves. So if we've done something very hard, maybe yeah, like, I don't know, give ourselves some extra time to, I don't know, watch a movie, or treat ourselves to a movie, or, I don't know, buy ourselves, I don't know, our favorite chocolate bar, or whatever it might be. Like, you can kind of choose what's motivating for you. But I think that's important in life. We all do hard things in life for reward, and this would be a very, very similar example. I also think that once you get going with that fear ladder, there is this inherent reinforcing property with it, where we actually
Absolutely.
get, yeah, like we feel good. Like I checked it off. I did it. I mastered that one. I can get to the next one. It feels really, really good. So I think in addition to external rewards, I think there's the intrinsic kind of reward, like an internal reward where we just feel good. And I think that's really rewarding in and of itself.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think the one thing that I add too, and looking for a comment from you is that sometimes a person has more trouble getting from step 4 to step 5 than they do step 5 to step 6. And so I say,
Mm.
take your time, take your
Yep.
time between steps 4 and 5, right?
I love that. Yes, that's very. Thank you so much for that. I really really appreciate that because um there's no I think I mentioned to do each step kind of repeatedly, like, and do it over and over again. Some steps you might master in one go and you're like, that was actually way easier than I thought. Then yeah, feel free to move on to the next step. Other steps you might do several times. You might do it 10 times, 15 times, 20 times. It might really kind of take a while to kind of get used to. But what we know from a lot of research is that when we do it over and over again, it does get easier. But some steps just might take longer, and that's okay.
So I think we're pretty well at the end here. I want to thank you very much. What a wonderful presentation. I want to let people know that you're available for seeing people with social anxiety and want to thank you very much. It was great. I had a lot of fun. Hope
Oh,
you did
good.
too.
I did too. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to do this talk. Yeah, thank you to BCPA for that.